name is Norm Volsky, your host, and this is the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast.
Thanks, Norm. It's an honor to be here, and it's been fun to work with you over the years.
Hello, and welcome to the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast with your host, Norm Volsky. And today we are honored to be able to have Joe Murad from Vida Health be joining us. Hey, Joe.
Norm, nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you. So, for all of our listeners and viewers that don't know Joe, we're thrilled to have him on the show. Joe is currently president and CEO of Vida Health and is a seasoned digital health executive and entrepreneur. As many of you know, Vida Health is a prominent digital health powerhouse focused on virtual cardiometabolic care that treats diabetes, obesity, through integrated behavior change, tech, and medication. Previously, Joe led WithMe Health, pioneering personalized medication guidance, was CEO of PokitDok, playing a vital and pivotal role in healthcare interoperability before its acquisition by Change Healthcare. And prior to that, Joe was COO of Extend Health and helped them get acquired by Willis Towers Watson for over $400 million. So, Joe's really run the gambit between digital health, benefits, PBM, you name it, and is a great thought leader in the space. Thank you for joining us.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So, looked at your background early in your career, you were really focused on tech only and, very much focused on, analytics and data. What inspired you to move into healthcare?
Norm, I actually kind of stumbled my way into it via tech, as you just mentioned. I had a mentor who had put some seed money in a company called Sash Communications that was actually digitizing the enrollment process for Shield of California. And that founder decided he was going to commercialize it and stitch together all the plans across the country for the individual and family space. That company turned into what is now eHealth Insurance as it operates in the marketplace, became the largest distribution channel for all of those products across the country, and really kind of disintermediating the broker as we had known it.
Yeah, it was one of the early innovators in this health insurance and digital health market. Let's jump to your time when you were COO of Extend Health, which got acquired by Willis Towers Watson for $435 million. Walk us through that experience. What was it like building, the largest private health insurance exchange in the country?
Well, Norman, that was incredibly interesting to me, right? Anytime you're introducing new models, like perseverance matters, right? And team matters for that matter. And oddly enough, as we were trying to pursue kind of a differentiated model in the marketplace, we've kind of fumbled our way into the retiree market after having a bunch of conversations with large self-funded employers of varying sizes. And we happened to have conversation with one of the largest auto manufacturers in the country that had this big problem around, trying to outpace the rate of inflation in healthcare in particular for their retiree benefit. And we just, they wanted to honor their commitments. These are long-standing, loyal folks that had worked for decades for them, and they're really struggling to find a way to fund that liability. And we were just incredibly relentless as a team, and we were committed to, trying to solve a problem. We were lucky enough to find one that was, material and impactful for these particular legacy organizations. And, I just never underestimate dumb luck and timing, because it just happens to be on the precipice. And when there was some real tumult in the economy at the time, and we created what I thought was a pretty interesting model that's we're always have been chasing since, right? Both from a revenue and economic perspective.
Yeah, I love that. You get a lot of advice from people who've been successful, and sometimes it's contradicting. Sometimes people say you got to be real focused and do one thing really, really well. And then at other times people say, but you also have to be flexible and you have to be able to, pivot quickly and, kind of move in another direction if like what originally you were planning on, doesn't ultimately, have the product market fit you initially, focused on. How do you balance and bridge those two? Because you mentioned like, hey, we kind of started in this one direction, then we pivoted and really hit our stride. Like, how do you balance those two things, in business? Because I've seen you've done it, multiple times.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the two kind of persistent things are timing and team, right? And
Hmm.
and really depending upon kind of the stage orientation of the business and where you are, and just even the macro level kind of impact of what's happening in the economy will determine what you do and when. But ultimately, it's about the team. Like you just have to have
Hmm.
a team who's willing to adapt. I love the concept of embracing a bunch of utility players complemented with some great expertise in specific areas. But no one likes to talk about it out here in the Valley, but sometimes truly timing does matter, right? Using the right place at the
Hmm.
right time. So I've seen it in kind of all forms throughout my career, and have been fortunate to be part of some successes, and also some ones that are just harder to try to dig out of the earth and get to scale. So uh, it depends. I think it's the typical consulting response. It depends, Norm.
Yeah, I find it funny because I'm lucky enough where I speak at like recruiting conferences and talk to firms and talk to search consultants that are trying to find their niche and really be a successful person in our industry. And I'll spend an entire 30-45 minutes walking through the benefits of being incredibly niche and doing one thing and one thing only and staying really disciplined and not really branching out and trying searches that are outside of your core competency. And then someone will raise their hand and go, well, Norm, like, how did you find this like space you're in now, digital health, and work with companies that sell to employers and health plans? I'm like, oh, because I made one exception one time and I met the Livongo folks and I moved out of hospital software and into employer and health plan sponsored software. So everything I just shared, you occasionally do have to decide to take a risk, but it has to be, really well thought out. So, it's funny how you gotta sometimes contradict yourself,
Could,
to
couldn't
be
agree more.
able to do
Right.
something
Not everything
correctly.
is just as predictable as we'd like, right?
Yep, 100%. So after the acquisition, you were COO of the exchange. The fastest growing segment at Willis was, that market. What did you learn during that time from the transition to, scrappy early stage company that built themselves into a player to kind of integrating into a much bigger entity?
Yeah. Well, to be frank, Norm, I think experiencing the culture shift was quite surprising, right? So if you think about combining a bunch of entrepreneurs with 14,000 risk adverse actuaries, you're bound to have some intriguing dynamics. But nevertheless, I came to recognize the broader implications and influence that actually introducing some of these innovative solutions to the self-funded employers can have. And that experience, helped shape and kind of broaden my perspective in the whole, health benefits space as a whole.
How do you feel, what Extend was doing and continues to do? How has that impacted how health and benefits are offered and delivered, in the US?
Well, we were really, I think, fortunate to be on the kind of precipice of some material changes, both legislatively and, when we introduced the Extend Health model, it really was to cap the unfunded liability for these large self-funded employers and their retirees. And the concept really was to allow these plan sponsors to effectively unwind their group-based
Mhm.
model, right? And put it on an individual chassis, and subsidize using an HRA for these qualifying 213D expenses. Uh, and there was just incredible arbitrage, frankly, between the group and the individual pricing, that benefited all parties, right? So the
Mhm.
result was retirees saved on average about $1,000 a year per eligible participant, which is extraordinary if you think about it, those who are living off fixed income.
Yeah.
Well, the employers actually got to cap their liability and move to a defined contribution model and create a lot more certainty. And that model, oddly enough, served as the framework for the ACA legislation and laid the groundwork for this emergence around what they call ICHRA, the individual coverage health reimbursement plans that are out there today that are garnering some real market momentum.
It's got to be just an amazing feeling to be able to help hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, like improve the quality of their life and like really ultimately solving for some of their anxiety of knowing like, hey, am I going to be able to depend on what I thought I was going to be able to depend on from a fixed income standpoint?
Yeah, it was that one was super proud of, as you can imagine.
I love it. I love it. So what inspired you to join PokitDok as president and CEO?
Well, I knew the founders, I tracked their progress, and was really impressed with the progression of the tech, and actually so much so that I participated in one of their early financings.
Mhm. So I remember when PokitDok, kind of entered the scene. That was in my days when I was like really focused exclusively on software sold to health systems. And I saw them sprout up. They were getting a lot of press. They were at HIMSS. I'm not going to lie. I might have met with them 2 or 3 HIMSS in a row. I
Yeah.
still had no idea what the hell they were doing. It was very high tech. They were
Right.
talking blockchain. I didn't really like comprehend the whole concept. Not sure if I would if I met with them for another 10 years. Walk us through exactly what they did, why it was important, and ultimately why Change Healthcare, saw value in it.
So a couple of things, right? So and it's not surprising to hear your comment, right? I think originally we lacked a little focus and tried to really boil the ocean for all intents and purposes, right? But PokitDok, the founders, I give them a lot of credit. They had incredibly bold ambition, right? To build a platform
Mhm.
as a service that was effectively, early a developer of all these cloud-based APIs, enabling third-party developers to, whether it's payers or health systems or these digital health companies, kind of more quickly and easily create a bunch of new applications and services
Mhm.
to integrate, whether it's identity management, real-time medical and pharmacy benefit verification, payment risks, scheduling, claims processing. No doubt we were swinging for the fences, right? And that
Mhm.
I give them a lot of credit. But that's hard to do, right? So we had to kind of narrow the focus, and the reason why I was engaged was to help, create a little more operating discipline.
Awesome. So, based on your guidance, what did the company eventually focus on, and what did they thrive in doing?
So as I'd mentioned, we kind of culled down some of the focus. Really, I think the benefit, and yes, we were early with blockchain. There were some use cases that made good sense, but ultimately, it was just some of the more pragmatic, components of service delivery in the ecosystem that we did well. And per my earlier comment, like focus is important, and resource, especially when resources are limited and timing matters. We were probably a couple years too early, in all fairness.
Hmm.
But as it relates to change, like I believe they appreciate the tech stack, right? It was a complementary set of capabilities, and that we could obviously offer to help accelerate their future roadmap. And the best example to me is we had built an entire clearinghouse with, it could be operated by 3 people, and I believe they had 300 or so with far more rudimentary tools.
Hmm. Gotcha. Yeah, I've always been really good at talking clinical outcomes and anything that has a clinical component. When it gets very tech back office, that's when I kind of lose my mojo a little bit. Um, in terms of having gone through many acquisitions, in your career, I think earlier prior to even healthcare, you sold a business to IBM. We had the Willis Towers Watson acquisition. We have, a big one with Change Healthcare. Like, what have you learned, from those? And what advice would you give a company if they were looking to acquire a smaller group? And what advice would you give like a leadership team if they're planning on selling to a bigger, vendor, and like how that impacts them and the things they should be asking about that they might not know?
I guess I'd offer, the following advice for both, any of those who are involved in an acquisition process, right? So as it pertains to employees in particular, just avoid letting acquisition consume all of your focus, right? And that's easy to do,
Mhm.
and don't let it become a distraction. Keep the team kind of centered on building a sustainable business. I mean, that's probably what makes most sense. That provides actually a
Mhm.
unique solution and a bunch of sought after capabilities. That's goal number one. And, as it pertains to the executives and the management team, really just ensure that the acquisition process doesn't become this sole focus or distract into ongoing operations, because it's easily get sidetracked. and just maintain a strategic vision around, how do we focus on building, again, sustainable business with a bunch of differentiated capabilities and align with that market kind of demands. And then that has a tendency to really, ensure your higher probability of a successful outcome.
All right. I'm seeing a pattern with your career. One huge issue is your thing you're solving for, and then whatever you do next is an even bigger, more grand, undertaking. So, we first focused on the largest private health exchange known in this country. Then we're talking about with PokitDok, like what they've done, like with tech and blockchain and like all of the moonshots they had, kind of they were working on, and you helped them focus. Then you wanted to take down the entire PBM industry with WithMe. So you joined WithMe as president, CEO. Walk us through just what encouraged you to move over, to WithMe, why you thought the PBM space was ripe for disruption, and, just what you've seen in the market since.
Yeah, it's, you're picking up a pattern that maybe I'm not a quick study or a smart guy because I just keep diving into the deepest end of the pool.
Well, you don't like small issues. You're not like following small niche, like, hey, let's just do this one little thing and do pretty well.
That's right.
Carve a niche out. You kind of go for these like big home run.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's what I appreciate and respect, right? So the company WithMe was incubated inside of an investor whom I had known from a previous contact while we were fundraising at Extend Health. And I was drawn to the idea of really kind of disrupting a segment that the healthcare ecosystem we operate in is incredibly complex, right? And dominated by a select few, riddled with a bunch of inefficiencies, conflicting interests with the customers they serve. Like, it just checked every box, right? Like, this is ripe for disruption. And our concept was really straightforward. It's like, how do you advance kind of the market beyond spread base, such as the PBMs such as ESI, Caremark, and Optum, and beyond even the transparent pass-through models like Navitus or Impact, and instead leverage modern tech to manage utilization at an individual level and pinpoint areas where like costs and health outcomes can be actually positively impacted.
I love that. It's only a $450 billion market owned by 3 main companies and a couple others.
Yeah, I think 2 Fortune 10 and 1 Fortune 30. So they have big balance sheets, Norm.
They sure do. What have you seen in the space, especially over the last couple of years? I saw a recent, big announcement that like Tyson Foods just started using RightWay's PBM solution, which I think, again, is like probably the biggest company that's kind of gone outside the big 3 that I've seen in the not so recent future. So just kind of walk me through just like what was WithMe a little early to the game? Like what are some of the impacts you guys made, and like what do you think that market is going to do, going forward?
Well, I love to see new entrants, whether it's RightWay, CapRx, SmithRx, whomever. It's great to see, right? Because it adds competition, a different perspective. A lot of those are built on modern stacks. So WithMe, what we did is we took, again, an entirely different approach to build what I would consider like a scalable data-driven analytics platform that can ingest all kinds of data. We just happen to start with pharmacy claims data, really for the purposes of building these rich member profiles. And that personalized data would get banged up against our clinical rule set and analytics engine and integrated with our clinical point of view to identify, opportunities for intervention. The CRM that we constructed would prioritize, and really personalize that outreach based on impact, complexity, engagement preferences, things of that nature. And then we actually built, an entire guide engagement platform and member tools to actually reinforce that behavior. So it was incredibly valuable at an individual level. Norm, the challenge is the market sometimes just doesn't care, right? Simply because of the rebate game that's happening in market.
Yep, 100%. Other than my listeners that have listened to all 28, 29 episodes, I mentioned this on a couple of these, that I'm a big proponent, and I think like the biggest unaddressed market in the entire like employer sponsored market is precision pharmacy, where it's like, hey, can we identify patients suffering in silence who are taking medication prescribed by their doctors and their pharmacists that is making them feel worse, not better? Can you intervene? Can you switch up, their drug regimen to allow them to, take their medication and adhere to their medication plan without, veering off track because their side effects or counteraction symptoms, ultimately cause them to stop taking the meds entirely. So again, that's a market I'm super bullish on. I cannot wait for someone, or a group of companies to be able to truly tackle that one, because I think ultimately if you can't help people who are suffering from side effects get the right medication, you just aren't able to solve for, overall end-to-end chronic disease.
And I wholeheartedly agree. I think the other thing, Norm, is just like, let's just follow the recommended clinical pathways too, right? Sometimes it's just as simple as that. And instead of leaping from diagnosis to biologics, right? There's a path that actually is more thoughtful and certainly more judicious for both the plan sponsor and ultimately the member, because no one really wants to be on medications if they don't have to be.
Yep. All of our founder and founding team listeners and viewers would probably love your advice on fundraising. When you were at WithMe, you raised $40 million from Oak and Omers and others. What tips would you give, especially in this environment, for founders that are looking to raise capital in these uncharted times?
So like the digital health space, as you know, has seen a huge surge in VC and private equity investment, like offering potential to access to capital that you didn't have 10, 15 years ago. However, I would argue there are only a select few that truly grasp the complexities, right? Navigating a healthcare ecosystem is incredibly complicated. And simply relying upon kind of technical prowess and, it's not going to guarantee you any success, market success. So penetrating a market that's dominated by, the few we were just talking about, whether it's consulting shops or these large organizations, require a solid plan, right? And you got to be able to demonstrate how the capital you're actually seeking is going to lead to cash flow break even, right? So at this stage, I've also believed like there's no real badge of honor for raising a bunch of capital, because I've always admired those who actually bootstrap their companies or raise minimal amount of capital. And while it's great to have the right backing and investor base, people tend to forget that every dollar raised adds future hurdles that you actually need to pierce to get back to a level playing field with those investors.
Yeah. Extra dollars is extra pressure. So take as much as you need and nothing more. What inspired you to join Vida as CEO?
Well, during my tenure running the PBM, where our primary focus was medication management and cost reduction through these therapeutic alternatives that you're talking about and adherence and recommended clinical pathways, I became aware of kind of this incredible mounting concern and pressure among the plan sponsors around GLP-1 medications in particular, and their impact on the potential pharmacy trend. The level of interest from employees in that class of medications is quite frankly unprecedented. I mean, you can't watch a football game without getting inundated with 3 different ads about it. And that presented, significant challenges for all the actuarial models due to this rapid and kind of substantial increase in demand. Vida, as you know, as you mentioned at the onset, is a virtual cardiometabolic clinic that happens to specialize in treating obesity, diabetes, and these related conditions like hypertension or hypolipidemia, where actually this comprehensive approach that we've constructed, combining the human kind of led managed care component with guaranteeing outcomes, seemed like it was a pretty well-timed solution and organization to be part of.
I love that. What excited you most about their mission and impact?
Well, a little further from my earlier comment, like we bring together this personalized coaching, right? Health coaching, personalized data. Like it's a critically important component that I think maybe we need to address, leveraging this data in varying devices to be able to ingest that information. We have a powerful engagement app. We have this medication, capability to achieve these clinical outcomes as a prescriber and deliver cost savings. And so while we kind of screen for mental health conditions, comorbidities, social determinants, to make kind of sure each one of those members is guided to the best path. It's really to help kind of achieve this clinically meaningful result. And we do it because, frankly, most Americans are affected by some cardiometabolic disease, and that we know how to prevent and treat, right? So like, that's what's interesting to me. And all it takes is just bringing all these pieces together and delivering to the people in the way, that works best for them.
That's fantastic. You're in your first 6 months. What have been your greatest learnings so far since joining Vida?
Well, Norm, like we have an incredible opportunity in front of us, right? And the market momentum, we have a solid platform. We have the infrastructure that kind of has built a differentiated component and set of services in the marketplace. We were early pioneers in this, in offering this integrated care delivery model, with almost 10 years of operating experience, right? Producing meaningful results. We have high retention rates. We have data to be able to substantiate the claims we're making. And then we continue to kind of embrace the founding principles that this business was built on, and that's to treat the root causes of obesity and diabetes, right, through personalized care and an integrated health, mental health support, human power, human connection, and then leverage kind of all the current interests that happen to be related to the chronic conditions to improve outcomes.
No,
I've
worked with Vida for a long time. We had Jason Perot on the podcast, a handful of months ago. And I think that says everything. Like the fact that Jason, who, founding member of EHIR, probably has looked at hundreds, if not thousands, of digital health solutions, felt so compelled, by what Vida was doing after running benefits at both AT&T and Boeing, like said, hey, like I want to work on the inside of that company. Like I want to change healthcare, not just for 40,000 people or several 100,000 people, but I want to do it for millions. So I think that's just a huge feather in the cap that the company's had for a while. You joining just bolsters and strengthens that. It's just awesome to see.
Yeah.
What are your philosophies around leading teams at high growth companies?
Well, when it leads to kind of comes to leading teams, like my philosophy usually centers around surrounding yourself with really exceptional individuals like a Jason, right, that you just mentioned. Whether you inherit the team or you build it from the ground up, like the key is to seek out the best talent and find dedicated folks who are eager to affect change. And that's easily said, but sometimes it's harder to implement. I've been incredibly fortunate to collaborate with a lot of really good individuals in my career, and those folks who are intelligent, committed, driven. So therefore, kind of my approach has always been identify the brightest, hardest working, who's willing to make the necessary sacrifices, because you have a tendency to spend a disproportionate amount of time with some of these individuals too. And I'm a big believer of granting people a lot of autonomy and allowing them to, surpass your expectations. Well, we're recognizing that, kind of the importance of weeding out those that don't align with the vision quickly is incredibly important as well. Because ultimately it's about kind of fostering a team and culture that, where excellence is not just encouraged.
And
but
how do you foster
expected.
that culture? You've done it time and time again.
Yeah. So I prioritize transparency. I think that's incredibly important. We're all part of the same team. There's no need to deceive anybody. In my experience, like, when company faces challenges and turbulence, which it inevitably does, like it's never up and to the right, those moments that truly kind of reveal those people's character is important to understand. So I like the concept, first and foremost, of prioritizing transparency. Secondly, I would say just establish some really clear objectives that align with the collective goals, right? Ensuring that the urgent doesn't get in the way of the important. And then lastly, don't forget to enjoy yourself, right? To my earlier point, like we tend to overlook that we just spend a lot of time together. And so it's important to, in my view, to foster an enjoyable atmosphere where kind of camaraderie thrives. And while I'm a big believer in working hard and it's crucial to ensure the probability of success, it's equally important to find moments where you can have some
really
fun
good
on that
advice.
journey.
How does the popularity of GLP-1 drugs revolutionize this, obesity management space? And how does Vida play a part in that?
Yeah, Norm, as you know, I mean, the GLP-1 medications are effective at kind of reshaping our entire understanding of their role around, chronic metabolic health in particular. Uh, and like similar to other chronic conditions, obesity, often demands more than just lifestyle adjustments. It's not just about diet and discipline and exercise. Um, and while again, there's behavioral modifications, I think can certainly aid in the segment of the population that's trying to shed like the critical 5% or 8% of body weight. We like to boast like this to my earlier comment, this proven decade-long history of success in this particular arena, right? In this category. And while medications, in my view, are kind of indispensable in specific cases, some of this stuff can just be achieved through more economic alternatives, right? So are there anti-obesity medications that are less expensive? Even if that, there's some subset or cohort of that population necessitates a GLP-1, we still have to figure out like how do we get them, and have a strategy to discontinue that medication at the right time if it's warranted and clinically indicated. Then so I mean that's kind of where I feel strongly about like you kind of have to combine change, behavioral change, human providers. Like it just it can't just.
And what are some of the unintended consequences of these GLP-1 drugs being overprescribed?
Well, I mean, at the current cost and neglecting kind of the following like recommended clinical pathways we just talked about and jumping right into the expensive GLP-1 medication for obesity when it's not clinically indicated, it's just not going to be sustainable for plan sponsors, right? And I think that's important to note. So while, I like the water seeks its own level, I see employers, implementing solutions that are going to embrace kind of a more pragmatic approach and require all these eligible participants to embrace a managed access concept, right? Where, to gain access to these medications that fall into this class, you're going to have to take it. You're going to have to take some interest in doing these other things. And how does
Vida integrate, with PBMs to smooth out that prior authorization process?
So when we're prescribing, for example, these AOMs, like we're gold carded by some of these PBM partnerships. The RX claims from Vida prescribing or prescribers bypass the PA process, and the claim is auto adjudicated. So that kind of smooths, at least removes some of the friction. And when we're not the prescriber, but we enroll, the enrollment is actually required for the PA approval. For example, with a GLP-1. Then we send the member level like enrollment data, even real time or daily, to the PBM for PA processing. So we try to get ahead of it and remove as much possible.
And walk us through that member experience at Vida, whether it's for obesity or for other chronic diseases.
Well, so it depends again on kind of the solution that we're delivering, but they receive the Vida program information via various channels. Member signs up, provides their health detail. We make a recommendation based on the program from that input of that information, and what they input in the medical claims data that we capture. The members then matched with a coach and can begin kind of using the app. Initial consults are established and a care plan and other devices ordered as necessary. And then we have weekly sessions with coaches or RDs, during that intensive phase. And then we reduce kind of coach reliance and as members kind of progress through the program with an increased app engagement, so they can leverage that at their discretion. And then there, in addition to therapists and NPs who need, needed for mental health or prescription support and things of that
nature. I'm looking through your background, you're a sales guy by background. Like that's where you came from, was business development. And then you kind of moved into, a C-level operator over time. Like how much do you still, kind of use that sales skill set, and how do you differentiate sales and leading a company?
I mean, I think
Yep.
you're always selling, right? At some point, whether you're raising capital or you're pitching the widget at hand. I think it's a valuable, at least experience from it's helped me in my career for all intents and purposes. But importantly, and I think this is lost on a lot of those who just kind of paint, those individuals who are individual contributors in the market as a sales kind of front end, is they are the tip of the spear, right? They have their hand on the pulse of what's happening in market. They get to hear from the market, like what's needed, what's not, and then collaborate with product development and the product marketing teams to figure out, like, how do we
Mhm.
hone the offering to serve the clients in our, in
Yeah,
our
and you
particular marketplace.
mentioned, a lot of investors don't necessarily acknowledge in this space just how hard it is. Like you could have a great product and that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be ultra successful. So, coming from that commercial background, what do you think it takes to be successful as a company commercially, selling to a combination of employers and health plans?
I mean, again, I always start with team, right? Because I think that, uh, and you have to have product market fit. But for all intents and purposes, is things are always going to be
Mhm.
modified, changed, or improved, and so you just need to have the dynamic nature of an organization that's willing to make
Mhm.
those changes kind of on the fly, but also be a disciplined operator, right? So you're still not chasing a bunch of revenue opportunities that are not maybe may not be accretive to kind of what you're ultimately trying to go
And what
achieve
was
as an
that
organization.
mindset shift from salesperson, sales leader to then like running a business? Like what were the things that you felt there was some internal conflict with? And then when did you just kind of veer off in the other direction where you're like, hey, like you just are in that running a business mode and not necessarily just, eating what you're killing?
Well, I was really lucky, Norm. I think I worked for a mentor and friend who loaded up a lot of
Mhm.
responsibility on me that it really had a narrow prism originally, right? As you could imagine, and it's very similar to running a business where you're digging out of the earth and you're a bit
Yep.
myopic on what you're focusing on in the immediate term, and then your aperture expands as you have an appreciation of some of the other operating components of the business and the functions that really are necessary to
Mhm.
scale and to be effective and to succeed. And that, I mean, again, I was lucky. I think I started with just how do you actually generate revenue, and I think
Yeah.
that's a critically important piece, right? Because ultimately, that's the measuring stick. Are you returning your investors' capital, and are you actually delivering honoring the commitments you've made to those early adopters, whether it's savings or improving outcomes, which seems like that's always the
Excellent.
recurring theme too.
Any just general principles about, running a business, running a high growth business and a very successful one?
Um, well, I mean, as you know, like this market's undergoing some
Uh-huh.
evolutionary changes all the time, right? And what I like, and I guess I appreciate, is you take it all the way up to 60,000 feet. Um, there's growing demand for transparency, from employers and payers, regarding like what's the impact of the subsidies they're making. You're seeing plan sponsors who are, facing increasing pressure for greater flexibility. These value-based care models that are gaining traction as an alternative to the traditional fee-for-service structures. And then you have modern tools that are now making, and they're actually now accessible that weren't there before, to be able to build businesses quickly and to empower individuals to manage some of their own healthcare expenses. And that's kind of necessitating a
Mhm.
departure from these outdated models, right? And adoption of kind of these new approaches. So um, I'm a big believer. It's why I spent my entire career here for all intents and purposes
Mhm.
around how do you embrace modern technology that can actually integrate a bunch of disparate data and empower individuals to affect and modify their behavior. So, they can have a little more control, they can reduce their costs, they can manage those chronic conditions, and ultimately they can improve their
I think you have
overall
just
kind of
such a
health and
unique
wellness.
perspective because, you've worked in startups, you've worked for some of your, career in a big consulting house, you've worked in the PBM space, you've worked in direct, to employer benefits department type companies. What's your predictions for the future in this space? What do you see around the corner that maybe not everyone without a keen eye,
Yeah.
would know is coming.
Well, I always thought the best kind of leading indicators are look at the
Mhm.
individual and the retiree market to a certain extent, because it's the barbell, right? If it's your own money that you're spending, it has a tendency to
Mhm.
determine kind of where the market is moving. Oddly enough, the large self-funded employers are
Mhm.
typically the laggards, right? I mean, to adopt real change. And that's frankly because it was an artifact of,
Mhm.
kind of amalgamation of all these different services that were lumped together. And then there were expectations that the employers going to subsidize all this at any cost. And then they realized, like, sometimes those costs
Mhm.
are outpacing the rate of inflation and they can't keep up, and their own profits. So people are getting smarter, and now there are just more tools available. But I think there's going to be more consolidation
Mhm.
around some of these point solutions, because there
Yeah.
is point solution fatigue in the market. And so, but that's, so you can have a more integrated service delivery with parts of it kind of hung off of it, if you would. And I think, we're at the precipice of change, because now we've empowered, those that are actually real utilizers. And that's where I'm really
Yeah, and
excited about
Vita's
where the
really well
market's going.
positioned because, yes, benefits leaders are inundated with point solutions. If one vendor can handle multiple chronic conditions, that obviously is music to their ears. So I ask everyone that comes on this podcast after we kind of go through their career and what predictions they have and getting their insights. How do we practice what we preach? How do we live, breathe, sleep healthcare? So, in very stressful jobs over the last several decades, how do you personally participate in wellness and de-stress?
Well, I like to eat our own dog food, so I actually signed up the moment I started here to see. One, I like to know what the member experience is like, but importantly,
Uh-huh.
like, we could all use a little discipline, right? I mean, I exercise every day. I get up early, find a way
Do
to
you
squeeze it
run?
in
Do
no
you
matter
lift
what.
weights? Like, what's
Trying
your
to work on a
regimen?
diet.
Okay.
I do a little bit of everything. Hit the gym, run, bike a little bit, get in the pool, or get in the water in some fashion. So I like to remain active. I think it's cathartic in so many different ways, right? Um, and at this stage of our lives, like, it's really important to
Mhm.
to remain that type of balance, even if you have to modify some of your
Yeah,
schedule to
that's
accommodate
great.
it.
Anything else you do other than exercise that just helps you like stay even keel and handle, the stress of running a company that's venture backed?
Oddly enough, Norm, I don't see it. Maybe I'm a little unique in that manner, but I don't find
That's
it
good.
stressful. I find it enjoyable, right? And it's probably simply because, again, that the coworkers that you're doing this with, they shoulder
Oh
a
yeah.
good piece of the load too, right? And I think as long as you're seeking kind of the same objective, and you're having fun along the way, as I'd mentioned previously, it doesn't feel like a stressful situation. It feels like you're actually on a mission to accomplish something that's really meaningful and impactful on a
I
lot
know
of
a lot
people's
of people
lives.
watching are all trying to motivate themselves to, live healthier, exercise more, meditate more, eat better. I think a lot of it is inspiration. Like people know like what the normal exercise routines are. People know like, oh, like you can do yoga or meditation.
Right.
When it comes to food, I think, in America, it's hard for sometimes people to know what's healthy, what's not. So just out of curiosity, are there any healthy recipes you make at home that might inspire someone and be like, oh, I didn't think of that. That does sound good. I'm going to try that myself.
Yeah, so I tried to, and it's probably a progression over the course of the past
Mhm.
10 years or so, right? So less red meat, um, you know, more, more protein, more
Mhm.
thoughtful about what you put in your mouth, right? Not snacking on a recurring
Yeah.
basis. This is hard. It's hard for all of us. But, and then just, balancing alcohol
Mhm.
intake too, I think is important. I mean, people forget, like, that actually has a material impact on your sleep, and has a lot of calories. So how do you take everything in a balanced manner, and be thoughtful about it? Because, like, there are models out there that are, like, solely keto driven, and like, we know that's hard, and I appreciate and
Mhm.
respect those that actually can adhere to that. But a lot of folks probably fall in different categories, right? And they do require some medications. And when it's clinically indicated, I'm a believer, right? Someone broached a question: would you rather have medications, access to medications, or access to doctors, right? And it's a great question, because it makes you stop and think. Like, modern medicine, it's so preventative, but then, boy, we certainly don't want to live without access to our primary care, or other specialists.
Any sneak peek you can give anyone who's going to go to your panel at Vive talking about the rise of GLP-1s, 9 a.m., Los Angeles Convention Center, show floor on the strip stage, Sunset Strip stage.
Yeah, I think, look, I'm fortunate to be surrounded with a bunch of clinicians. I love, like, let evidence-based medicine talk. Like, I'm not the clinician on stage. I just think I have an interesting perspective, because we get to sit at the 60,000 foot level and see what's happening in kind of the macro perspective with employers, plan sponsors, and varying forums. So I think it's going to be an interesting discussion with some thoughtful insights from really smart people.
All right. Well, we're all looking forward to that. Joe, thank you so much for joining us on the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast, and congrats on all your success and future success.
Thanks. My pleasure, Norm. Thank you.
Thank you for joining. Please like, comment, and subscribe below if you enjoyed it.